Well, hello, A Taste of AZ listeners. I am one of your hosts today. I am Luke from A Taste of AZ. Alongside me is one of our wonderful writers, fantastically talented photographer, Marcy Symington, and of course, our guest today. Would you guys go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Jon. I'm one of the owners of Proof Bread.
And my name's Amanda. I'm John's wife and also an owner of Proof Bread.
And right now we are in what I will lovingly call almost like a Frankenstein house garage bakery thing, because you were explaining before we jumped on the different evolutions of this place, and it's pretty incredible. Looking past where we are right now, there's an addition that you said your father built entirely himself.
Yeah, so we're standing in the old two-car garage, which we had at the very beginning, and we are baking loaves in the oven room, which my dad put together for us in 2019. And you guys entered through an RV garage, which we added onto the bakery in 2020. There's definitely been a lot of evolutions here, and the most recent has been sort of a reclamation of personal space. So for 5 years, our personal items were wherever we could fit them, not in here. And you know, we moved onto Main Street last fall. So
Main Street in Mesa, that is.
Yeah, Main Street in Downtown Mesa. So this place sort of became a ghost town bakery for a little while, and we've been using it as a multi-purpose kind of project space. So it still has the remnants of Proof, which really Proof's main soul, I think, was built in this place.
Okay.
But now it's a little bit in limbo and still on transition for its next stages.
So let's go back to the beginning of that journey then. What is the introduction of Proof into your guys' lives?
So we were actually traveling a lot to Poland to visit my parents during the summer months leading up to Proof. And on one such trip, we discovered this incredible artisan bread. And we went to this local grocery store near my parents' home, picked up this large round loaf and brought it back and ate it while it was still almost a little bit warm from the oven in the morning. At that time, I had just fallen in love with that style of bread. I had had artisan bread a little bit growing up, although in Poland, it's more of a main thing, whereas I grew up in Chicago. My parents ended up moving back for retirement. So on one such trip, we came back from Poland and were on a hunt to find something comparable here in the Valley. We stumbled upon Proof at the Gilbert Farmers Market back in 2016, where we became regular, loyal customers every single week. Fast forward about a year, and we went to Poland again. Actually, this time it was a little bit of a difficult trip. My mom wasn't doing so well health-wise. There was a lot of stress and anxiety on that trip. So we got home on a Friday night, and the first thing I wanted to do was go back to the market on Saturday morning and pick up a loaf of Proof bread for my own personal comfort. We show up to the farmer's market. This is June of 2017. The person who is selling for the original owner, Jared, her name was Karen. She saw us coming up and didn't say hello or anything. Actually, her first words were, "He's moving," referring to Jared. So that was Saturday. By the following Wednesday, just 5 days later, I had done all the things to prepare to basically take Proof over and was showing up to Jared's garage to learn how to bake bread for the first time. So it was kind of a crazy gut instinct move in that moment.
He did ask for permission.
I was going to say, what was your reaction when he came, when he said, "I'm going to buy this bakery"?
He actually came and he asked, he's selling the bakery. Can we buy it? I'm thinking he's just going for a recipe, but there was something about it that just felt right, to do something with our hands. And originally I was thinking it was going to be sort of like our hobby thing, but it quickly took over.
So Jon explained his introduction to artisan bread in a way that was like something out of a storybook. I felt like I was like seeing it unfold in front of my eyes. Was it that same way for you, where it was just like this incredible thing that you couldn't believe, how much a part of your life it became?
I wouldn't call it a storybook. It was a little bit more of a struggle for me. Like, I didn't grow up with this type of bread. I'm Lebanese originally, and so
Okay.
I grew up eating pita bread. And so, I mean, bread was definitely a staple. But I did grow up very close with my mom and in the kitchen. And so there was something about it that felt right. But as far as the sourdough, like, growing on me, it took a lot longer.
Did it? Okay.
Yeah.
And so what exactly is artisan bread as you would describe it?
The word artisan is probably one of the more overused terms in, the business world, but I would define artisan in particular as something that you do as a craft, as something that you do with a lot of intention, something that isn't just purely efficient, but rather is tied to culture and history. And in terms of bread making in particular, right around the time of 1850, commercial yeast was isolated in a lab. The vast majority of all bread making went in that direction, and very few people looked the other way. So in our case, everything we do is with a sourdough starter. We don't actually have any commercial yeast here or at the bakery. So we're trying to stay true to at least 10,000, if not 13,000 years of human bread tradition in leavening bread with just a sourdough starter.
Do you acquire the sourdough starter when you buy the business?
In this case, yes,
Okay,
we
so almost
did.
like an intellectual property or something in a way.
So at the beginning, that's what certainly I thought. It was, we actually gave our sourdough starter, well, actually we didn't. Jared named our sourdough starter Harriet. And it's a motherly name based on a Family Matters.
I think the Mom and Family
Yeah,
Matters.
Family Matters. Which oftentimes sourdough starters are named some form of mom. A lot of people call a sourdough, in different languages, actually sourdough starters literally have that name, mother dough. So we had a little bit of a very intimate connection with our sourdough starter from the beginning, and we didn't quite understand it because we just kind of were thrown into this by our own will, of course. So the first several years, it was 2 to 3 times a day, 7 days a week of feeding the sourdough starter at room temperatures. We were really afraid to do anything like refrigerate the sourdough starter, which now we really understand the science. So we know that we can cool a sourdough starter down to refrigerator temps and slow down the activity, sort of trap it at peak production. And that allows us a little bit more freedom, especially on days off, where we can take a day or two off from feeding it. But we definitely inherited Harriet as a part of the business, and with our limited understanding at the beginning, Harriet was definitely the most valuable aspect of Proof at the beginning.
Yeah, I always joke and call Harriet my wife's or my husband's mistress. She was on our honeymoon.
Yeah. Well, and so when you took over the business and weren't able to refrigerate and were much more busy trying to grow a new business, what is that process like? Were you business involved? Like, had you run businesses on a high level before or owned businesses before Proof?
So my background has primarily been in one form or another of entrepreneurship.
Okay.
I started my first sort of entrepreneurial venture as a 16-year-old right out of my first job. I had a job at IHOP waiting tables, and I took my first few paychecks and bought actually that tennis stringer in the background here.
Oh, really?
And I started stringing my high school teammates' tennis rackets, trying to find other people to string tennis rackets for. That sort of morphed into teaching tennis for a living, which I did for a while, which morphed into starting a number of idea-based startups, some failures in there. I was running a video mystery shopping company with my ex-wife leading up to Proof. And I had gotten a divorce a couple years prior to Proof becoming part of our lives. So all of that was sort of on the decline. There was not the same investment as there originally was. I had been doing that for 7 years. And I was looking to do something that was not on the computer so much, that was more tangible, real. I wanted to do something that every generation my family could connect with, and Proof just grabbed a hold of me in a way that it's hard to explain. It was an all-in dive, so much so that really I think when Amanda says it was difficult in the beginning, it was definitely a huge change.
Yeah. It was akin to like having a baby and how much that like throws a wrench in your routines and your life. But as far as backgrounds go, I mean, like I said earlier, I'd grown up in the kitchen all the time, you know, like with Lebanese cooking, it's like super fresh, constantly chopping everything and setting out like beautiful big tables with big family coming over. So I think we were both kind of craving like that tangible, like doing something tangible, you know, and I actually grew up in farmers markets. So when our kids were younger, I wanted to like share that experience with them. And so before even buying Proof, we had made a vow as a family to kind of connect more with our local community and go out to farmers markets, just so the kids kind of also had that same, it was just really a warm way to grow up. You know, the people who make your food, they look after you sort of, you know, so.
Well, and it sounds like you guys were searching for something, like you mentioned artisan before, but something, you know, that really connects a group of people, not only your children and your guys' family specifically, but you see the way that your business is built out. They very much feel like part of the family as well. Recently for Easter, you posted about this publicly, so I don't think this is considered new information, but you kind of had a hiccup with some of your dough or whatever it was. And, you know, we actually had a podcast scheduled for that day, and we ended up having to reschedule because things happen in business. And just the sense of the way you were talking on the phone, it almost sounded like, you know, we got to get the family together and solve this problem. It didn't sound like it was just this, you know, economic issue of, you know, we got to make a return on our purchase or our sales of bread and whatnot. And so I'm curious how, you know, in the beginning, was that connection there, or was it just the stress of starting a new business? Did you feel from the beginning like you were building kind of a family operation?
There was absolutely no worries. I shouldn't say, there was a lot of worries about finances, but there was no focus on the financial side. We were way too wrapped up in this room, making dough and learning how to be bakers. And our identity as a business was wrapped up in the actual work of bread making. We hardly had time to do anything administrative for the business. The days were extremely long. I would even say that the idea of buying Proof is the wrong perception. We did trade some money for Proof, although it was definitely more of a baton passing.
Sure.
Than necessarily a transaction.
Yeah, Jared had many like offers for the business, but there was something about, he had us come and work with him in his garage, and there was something about the connection between the three of us that I feel like he made him want to give us the business.
Yeah, had we actually moved maybe a day or two later, the original owner of Benny Blanco Tortillas might have been the owner of Proof.
Oh, really?
He was amongst the contenders, not the current one, Chris, but rather Benny.
Sure. So being that you guys weren't the original owners of Proof, this was not the original bakery, correct? So talk to me about that transition, because if I'm not mistaken, that was an exciting one, to put it one way.
And a quick one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very. So Jared had actually gone through his own transition earlier in the year. He was first a chef and became a baker along the way. I believe actually Proof originated during his time working for Aaron Chamberlain at St. Francis, where he was working on a bread program there. Then he became the chef at American Way Market in Chandler, and Proof actually had been in his home, but then moved into a closet-sized room at American Way for a time period. And then he moved it back to his home in early 2017. It was actually after a little bit of a partnership failure for him, and he went through that last stretch of his ownership very much alone in the business and not having any days off. It was a really you could tell how worn out he was when we first were baking together. He had actually told me on day 2 or 3 that he hadn't had a day off in many months. I think he had cited February, and we were in June. And he was telling me all of what we might come to experience in the fall, especially given that the summertime is the slower season. It was a little bit unreal for me at the time. I was so focused on learning how to make bread, and adrenaline was definitely moving things forward. But we were showing up to his garage 4 a.m. The original garage that he was baking out of was very much exposed. There was an open breezeway to the backyard. Part of the garage was kind of open cinder block wall. So we were very much baking in the summer heat, trying to make sourdough croissants, for instance, when the ambient temperature is over 90 degrees in the middle of the night and quickly climbing into the morning. Mm-hmm. It was a very, very much a difficult entry. We learned in probably the most rudimentary medieval way that you could, with a slight advantage of having electricity for our ovens. But even the original convection oven, when you're alone and when you don't have the revenue or finances to be able to pay for help, you end up having to sacrifice a lot of things, amongst which are things like equipment maintenance. Mm-hmm. Jared also had 7 kids, so and he now has 8, but at the time it was 7. So the original convection oven that we brought over here just 2 weeks afterwards, it was sparking from the sides.
Wow.
Busted thermostats in both the ovens. The bottom deck had a broken top element. So there was a lot of workarounds.
Deferred maintenance.
Yes. And honestly, I can't blame that. Amanda, can you go get that?
Yes.
So Amanda's actually going to just release steam on our oven, which was our first huge investment. About a year into owning the business, that original oven that Jared had given us in the original transaction broke. We didn't know any equipment repair people at the time, but we brought people in that we found on Google. We paid something like $1,000 for them to come out just to service it, only to find out that they couldn't order any parts for it because it was so old. And that actually led us to selling the one asset that we had, which was Amanda's first home, original condo. We took all the proceeds of that and bought this oven, and then financed the labor for the rest of the year in 2018. So this oven really was kind of that first step towards more of a manageable experience, I would say.
Well, and this oven seems like a Lamborghini to the Ford Pinto shooting sparks that you had before. When you got this new oven into your business, did it give you that kind of super power push that you might expect from something like that?
Not on day one. We actually didn't have the electrical capacity to run the whole oven at first. So when we first moved it in, we had to get rid of the other 2 ovens entirely, and we could only power half of this oven for the first 8 months that it lived here.
Wow.
And the other part of it was upgrading our entire electrical panel, which all in all cost about the same amount as the oven. The oven at the time, I think it's probably more now, but at the time it was about $20,000. And to get a doubling of our electrical panel also cost about $20,000.
Wow.
So, these were huge numbers at the time.
I will say, though, it was nice to have something like reliable.
Sure.
Yeah.
It definitely changed our perception on equipment, because the first year we didn't have any. We actually were hand mixing for about a year and a half, didn't have any mixers. And
yeah, there was like a weird sense of pride that came with that. Like you're working so hard, but we didn't have to be working that hard, and we had to learn that the hard way.
In some ways, it was great that we did, though. How many people can say that they were hand mixing in the thousands of items? Because we were producing about 2,000 croissants a week, by the time that we got a dough sheeter to laminate croissants. So we were hand laminating croissants, which that's 81 layers of dough, butter that you have to use a rolling pin, or in this case, we did sort of a makeshift hand cranked pasta roller that we built some tabletops around. Just kind of, we definitely bootstrapped our way all the way up to here. And that's part of what makes Proof a little bit special, because any major form of capital, I believe the first requirement would have been efficiency through commercial yeast. The achievement of efficiency in a sourdough bakery is a much higher threshold than efficiency in a yeasted bakery, just because everything has to go over a 30-hour process. So you accumulate a lot of items in your space, thus you need a lot more space. So we were trying to do something that hardly anybody is doing around the world anymore. Artisan bakeries in general, the ones that call themselves artisan bakeries, often are putting a small percentage of yeast in their doughs, even if they are using a sourdough starter, just to cut down on the time.
Yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, he mentioned the 30-hour process earlier, and I just wanted him to kind of expand upon that when he gets a chance.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So, well, if you think about wheat, this is something that has fed humanity. It's in the Western world in particular, we could attribute it to the whole reason why humanity has thrived to the level that it has. And one thing in common is that all bread was naturally leavened. Now, a whole grain or whole wheat bread is difficult for our bodies to break down. This whole idea of gluten intolerance that people have, or just in general, there's some anti-nutrients found in whole wheat. Fermentation is something that is unique in sourdough bread making, in the sense that it's extended, and that extended fermentation helps break down gluten. It neutralizes anti-nutrients found in wheat. And so the way in which we produce bread is akin to the bread that made humanity successful, as opposed to the bread that we find out in the world today that everybody sort of makes into enemy number one, enemy of the state. So, and you can feel it. People that buy our bread, ever since the very beginning, our core customer base, many of them came up to us at the farmers markets, which, by the way, were the whole thing that kept us going, because we were working 24-hour days sometimes, and we showed up to the farmers markets and we were just lit up by the reaction of our customers to the bread that we were making, just like we were originally excited to receive the bread Jared was making. But many customers say, this is the only bread I can eat. This is the only bread that doesn't make me feel really bloated.
Yeah, when I said that I was struggling, it was like really this aspect that like brought me over the hill, was like going out to farmers markets every Saturday and seeing the same faces over and over again, and how happy that, they were to receive their bread. And then the other piece of that is this learning more about the science. So I'm very much into nutrition. I'm not like a super nerd, but I really believe in eating all of your colors and, getting all that you need.
Which is part of the culture you grew up in, correct?
Yeah. I mean, my parents tell stories of going outside and picking fresh grapes, and, it's just, it feels like Eden, like when I imagine it. But learning about the actual true, like, what is sourdough? I used to hate sourdough. I used to like scoff at it,
Really?
I was like, because I was only eating sourdough from the grocery store, which is like they pour in acid and manipulate the flavor, and that's not true sourdough. But I love the bread that we make now, and I love it even more knowing that it's better for my body.
So I want to circle back to the chronology of your guys' story a little bit. So remind me what year it was when you acquired your new Lamborghini of an oven.
So that was early 2018, spring of 2018.
Okay. So from there, you guys are continuing to go to farmers markets. Is that the only place that you were selling through the next few years?
Your main customers? That was
when we first took on Proof, it was about 50-50 between one farmer's market and then 7 days a week of restaurant baking. Now the 7
Meaning
days
baking to supply restaurants
Right.
specifically.
Now the 7 days a week amounted to a lot more effort and a lot less return than showing up to one farmer's market on Saturday. And we were not in the driver's seat of what we were making. We were basically making, what the restaurants wanted, and almost all of them wanted something different.
And having to deliver to them, I imagine.
Having to deliver.
Yeah, that's
yes.
big.
So actually sort of through a lot of difficulty in the beginning, we realized that actually Amanda saw it right away, and it took me months because I didn't want to let anybody down. So I didn't want to break up with any of these accounts that we had inherited.
Such a people pleaser.
But eventually we pretty much got out of wholesale baking altogether. It was very, very clear that even now at our current setup, wholesale is difficult to accommodate and much less rewarding. We get to bake what we want to bake, and we get to see the end result of who we're selling our bread to. So we started with the one Gilbert Farmers Market, but a few months in September of 2017, we joined the Phoenix Public Market, now the Downtown Phoenix Market. So Man and I split forces. She was at Gilbert, I was at Phoenix. And shortly thereafter, Fridays became like a 3 a.m. start to really no finish until after the farmers markets on Saturday afternoon.
And so emotionally, is that, that would probably break some people. Me, I'm not trying to get up at 3 a.m. and then have to serve, 1,000 people at a farmer's market or whatever. What is that like emotionally? You said initially you guys had kind of an adrenaline that was fueling, at least you personally. Did you share that, or were you guys kind of feel like you're fighting at this point?
Oh, it was a struggle. There was that adrenaline piece, but I mean, I would say that my low point was trying to hit Jon with a broom because I was just like out of my mind, so tired.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Now, it's very difficult to put into words all of what those original moments were like. People often talk about the sacrifice around starting a new business or taking on a new business, but doing something arcane like baking in a way that really no one has done at a commercial, I shouldn't say no one, but very few people have done at a commercial level since the 1800s is particularly challenging. Trying to span a 30-hour process without the revenue to really support a team was difficult. We were fueled by the reactions. We're fueled by also our improvement. We're fueled by the craft and the community element of all of this. It's interesting how people have responded to our brand and how they even responded back when it was Jared's brand. There's more to Proof than just the bread and the transactions.
Well, you mentioned how very few people are doing this because it takes longer, which as an entrepreneur, for someone who doesn't understand your perspective of it or hasn't been introduced to it, that's kind of a red flag of counterintuition, right? It doesn't exactly make sense. Why would you specifically choose to create a product that takes longer? And then on top of that in and of itself kind of removes the wholesale as a customer, right? It makes a lot less sense. It makes less profit. And maybe that's the same way for regular baking, but I bet with a more typical commercial yeast, that is more viable. And so there's another counterintuitive thing. And so with a lot of businesses, those questions are kind of asked, and especially more on an artisan level. Why are you putting this more love into it? And I figure for you guys, it came down to not only the belief that you held in the product, but seeing people kind of verify that every day in a way that shifted your entire perception of sourdough bread. Is that a correct assumption to make?
Yeah, I would say
I missed the beginning part of that. So.
Obviously there are numbers, and you guys ran the numbers and said, okay, here's what we have to do to make this happen. But you could have done things to make it easier, but ultimately you didn't choose that because you were confident in what you're creating.
Didn't sacrifice the quality.
If anything, we made it harder. There were There were actually certain breads at the beginning that Jared was putting a little commercial yeast in because they were harder to leaven. So our fruit and nut loaf, as an example, the weight of the fruits and the nuts in the loaf make the leavening more challenging. And if you actually do an apples to apples comparison of leavening power between a sourdough starter and commercial yeast, it's actually insane. You need 5 entire 5-gallon buckets of sourdough starter to mimic the leavening power of just 10 grams of commercial yeast, or a spoonful.
Wow, that is incredible.
Obviously, you can't put 5 buckets of sourdough starter in a loaf of bread. A loaf of bread is much smaller than that. So you really have to understand the science. And then also you have to take care of your sourdough starter in an extraordinary way to achieve any type of leavening power from it. So you have to feed it at the right intervals. You have to understand when it's at its peak and not be feeding it when it's already on its decline, because it's all about actually what's happening in there. And there's millions of microorganisms forming, a cell population in there. And there's more going on in that sourdough starter than what's going on outside of it. It's just that we can't see it because it's at a microscopic level.
It's like that scene at the ending of Men in Black where it's like our planet, and then it zooms out and it's got the galaxies, and it goes to the universe, and at the very end it is like a marble that these giant aliens are playing with, and that's our entire universe wrapped in there. That's almost like what you're explaining as bread baking being like.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say what was driving us was, like you said, just that feedback of like, we're making this and people are enjoying it. But also, I think intrinsically, like, we just wanted to do a good thing.
The idea of being in the community and really believing what we were doing and figuring out how to make it viable was driving me the entire time, and still drives me to this day, because we're not out of the woods yet. It seems like every year there's some crazy thing that happens that destabilizes. We went through, obviously, the pandemic, and then we were forced out of this garage bakery, and now the costs of our ingredients as well as the cost of our labor in the last 12 months have skyrocketed.
Yeah, and all the while, we're trying to live our life and connect with our own families, and navigating all of that at the same time.
And so is the bread that you had in the oven right now, is that finished now?
Yeah, can you smell it?
I can. It smells absolutely incredible. Yeah. Can we pull some over there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Put some over here and put them on display.
Want me to grab some?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Amanda.
Yeah.
And while she does that, Jon, if you would kind of speak to, you mentioned it briefly there, how you were forced out of this garage. To circle back into the timeline, you guys were producing bread, bringing it to farmers markets, shifting away from the wholesale market, and getting your products in the hands of hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people, and they're just loving it. And so you're kind of moving the ship along, it sounds like, and then you were forced out of this as your bakery. Talk us through what that was like.
It was my greatest fear the entire time. We were licensed to be here through the county, through the Cottage Foods program. Although there's a lot of assumptions made on what a Cottage Foods program is. I take the most historical definition of cottage foods, and that's if you go into any area of the world, which cottage industry is still thriving, especially in places that don't have the economic means of the United States. It's livelihood. It's people actually being able to support themselves. Although cottage food industries are definitely regulated heavily depending on where you are. Arizona is one of the more favorable states where there's no revenue caps, for instance. If you do this in California, you're limited to something like technically, I think $40,000 of gross revenue per year, which is absolutely impossible to make a living in. That's before all expenses. Arizona didn't have any such restrictions in cottage foods. Everything we were doing was above the books, but city zoning ordinances ultimately got us because, again, it's actually quite impossible to cover a 30-hour baking process without some help. And yet we have a zoning ordinance here that apparently does not allow for non-resident employees. And we had one particular neighbor, there might have been multiple, I don't know, but one that we know of that was adamantly opposed to the fact that we were doing anything like this here. Maybe didn't like the smells, or I don't know. Actually, really what was being cited over and over again was the fact that there were vehicles parked legally in front of my home on the curbside. And this neighbor had been calling in, to cite this code violation. And so it took a while, but it was kind of a thorn in our side. Now, for us, had we been shut out of here any earlier, Proof would have just probably gone away. The reason being is I don't think people quite understand how difficult it is to financially pull all of this off. Mm-hmm. And in that way, I'm a strong proponent for cottage industry because it allows people to do things that otherwise are not possible anymore. It allows us to dig into history and culture.
Absolutely.
It's way more human also.
We would have probably stayed here to this day, not indefinitely, but we would have moved more organically than we otherwise had to. The amount that we had to ramp up from here to the next level in order to make it possible to pay rent on a building and to bear all the costs of a commercial facility, which come with new licensing, new regulations, things like investing thousands of dollars into sprinkler systems. The build out almost killed us, quite literally. But at the time that we were served with a letter that we had 4 months to move, we went to our community and shared the situation. And actually, we had just that year earlier closed on the RV garage. We had just invested a huge amount of capital in that. So all in all, I mean, in this place, we were hundreds of thousands of dollars in investment in equipment that we couldn't really get out because it was no longer viable at the next stage of things, at least not at the rushed next stage of things. And so we were posting about this, and so many people were saying, hey, start a GoFundMe. And we're a little bit hesitant about it, but after a week of being pestered to do this, we did. We received over $100,000
wow, that's
from
incredible.
People representing over 100 countries.
Wow.
And we were lucky in the sense that we had started this YouTube channel 6 months prior. So many of the comments flowing through our GoFundMe were, you have shared so much wealth of information that we can't find anywhere else about your bread making, about your business. You've shared so much. We want to help you out in this situation. So that covered many of our losses from this place and allowed us to sort of start again, although, the build out cost over $500,000. And that was bootstrapping every little bit that we possibly could. We didn't have $500,000. So we raised a lot more in the form of debt. And this was in the middle of the pandemic. So it was definitely a traumatic time to move, in particular when we had done a lot to try to protect ourselves in terms of our business and our livelihood. And, it was nice to be able to work here from a home for the few people that were working for us rather than working in a public space. So it was definitely a very traumatic time.
Well, and that's kind of the entrepreneurial journey in general, right? Not to make it sound like I'm minimizing what you guys went through at all, but, with your other business experience and being kind of an entrepreneurial person and having that personality, that kind of like core thing that you can't really just build into someone, I'm sure you, in a way, welcome those opportunities, but at the same time, sometimes you're just like, you feel like you're banging your head against a wall because you can't make any progress. And when you do and expand, someone says, oh, by the way, you can't use that anymore.
You did it wrong. Yeah.
Was the purpose of the RV garage for your trucks?
No. The reason we did an RV garage was we knew one day it wouldn't be a bakery. So we made it an RV garage so that we could have more space for the bakery, but we could also turn it into something viable for the home.
Gotcha.
But actually the purpose was to find a place to store grains. At the time that we were building it, we were already storing roughly 4 pallets of flour at a time. So it was quite a bit. We also didn't really have any space for packaging. And So we just naturally needed it. If you saw us on Friday night before a farmer's market here, you could hardly walk. It was just like dodging in between, items. This entire floor space was just completely full of our Saturday activity. Part of the difficulty in that, the asymmetric growth, where Saturdays still to this day are more than every other day of the week combined. So,
and so are you still attending farmers markets?
oh yeah, they're still the core of our business. And while we are working on diversifying, especially trying to get, a little bit more revenue through the week, the farmers markets have been our main form of viability. Now we're trying to slowly graduate from that. But without farmers markets, we wouldn't be anywhere.
I think they're part of our identity too. I don't ever foresee a day that we won't be at any farmers markets.
And so you secure the funding through multiple ways, whether it was painful or easy. At sometimes you did it, and you start the build out of this new place. Walk me through kind of what, obviously the difference is scale, right, in a different location in general, but walk me through what some of those different components are, some of the things that allowed you to kind of take that next step and prepare for a future where you not only are still going to farmers markets, but serving the community of Downtown Mesa as well.
Yeah, so first, finding the building in particular was interesting. We had no idea how we were going to pull this off in a few months, and the city was gracious enough to allow us an extension. We chose Downtown Mesa in hopes that the city would see, hey, we're investing into the heart of the community. We're investing in a district that is hoping to revive into something amazing, which it's well on its way now. And so it was, there was definitely a political component there, but we were actually eating at Tacos Chihuah's one day, which is our neighbor now, and we left Tacos Chihuah's. It was like a month after they had opened. We noticed next door was just this vacant building and we peeked in. It looked amazing, although it was covered floor to ceiling in storage of some kind, like AV equipment. So you couldn't really see much through the building. And it was about a week later that I took a trip down there, just walking around the district. We had wanted to be in Downtown Mesa. We had been looking at that district for years.
Yeah, we had made like some plans. It's like long distant plans of like, we want to be in the community that we live in, and we want to eventually be able to own the property. And we also wanted to, as much as we could, self-finance.
So found the building. The build out process itself was a little bit insane because this building was not, it was a historic, built in 1880 originally. And
Wow.
it was not a kitchen. It was actually a wedding venue. The very, very back had some higher amperage outlets. Actually, we were misquoted by our architect on how much power was coming in. So
Oh, wow.
we ended up having like a $60,000 stumbling block in the middle of construction. We had a huge plumbing mishap in the middle of construction that led to tearing up the whole floor. So the build out also was quite difficult. But we made it through. We just kept going. We had people in here in the garage, one of which is our production manager now. He's just barely 20 years old and couldn't have made it through this whole time period because I was busy trying to build the new bakery and he had to keep this place going meanwhile because it's our livelihood. There's nothing else. So since then, it was a very short process. 2 weeks we had before we started to draw up plans. I was kind of just daydreaming about that space before even really having access. It's only 22 feet wide by 140 feet long. So I was kind of drawing on a grid paper, just trying to figure out how to make things fit, looking at the type of equipment we needed. And the goal was to be able to grow for a number of years forward so we didn't have to keep reinventing the wheel, which we've been stuck in that pattern. It's been like, build something out, outgrow it in a year. Build something out, outgrow it in a year. And so it's like never catching up. So we wanted to at least have something for a number of years forward that would be viable. So got our plans together, got it all going, tried to find a contractor, tried to get it all going under a little bit of duress. And we finally made it in. We actually baked here on a Wednesday in August. And on a Thursday in August in 2021, we were baking out there.
Nice.
No pause. The team that we moved in with, we didn't have much time to coach them through the whole experience. And construction had gotten delayed, so much so that we moved in at the start of the busy season, really. So
Yeah, you know when you like play a video game and like you have like the life of your character, it was like our line was very
Yeah.
low.
Hopefully since replenished, though,
Yes,
right?
Yeah.
well, very recently, we went into the new space in the fall, didn't have much time to catch our breath, and all of a sudden we're doing twice the production between September and October. We projected that, but we also projected that we would have a few months to prepare, and specifically to prepare our team, which, this is our business. It's our life. We've been at it. Everything we have is in it. And I believe employees deserve a little bit of a more gentle treatment than that.
Yeah.
So that was a rough treatment. And as a result, we went through a huge turnover event later in 2021. And essentially, aside from, I believe, 3 individuals, 2 management type individuals, and 1 person in our production team, we started again. And now we have an incredible team. We're investing heavily into them. We've lifted our labor rates year over year over 30% on baseline, although it feels like we're not even keeping up with inflation.
Sure.
So, but the people that work for us, and historically, all the people that have worked for us have not worked for us just for a paycheck. They've worked for us for the
Purpose.
entire community of what we do.
Yeah. Going back to your question about how it felt to have people in here, it did always sort of feel like family. And I was really afraid that a piece of that was going to get lost in the move just because of the space. But I like to think we're doing a little bit better, now that we have a little bit more reserves to pull from. We're doing a lot of like investing in our employees, not just in raising their pay, but also, in the education and what we give back to them and the flexibility and how we're trying to sort of build, a rising tide lifts all ships. So we're trying, to like go with that mentality in mind of like, okay, if we're all working together and we're all being efficient, we can all achieve a really good work-life balance where we're doing something we're really passionate about, but we also have time to recharge and, we're making enough to live. So
you've got your foundation set. You're continuing to grow your business, obviously. We have some of them in front of us here, but talk to me a little bit about what kind of products you guys are carrying that people can expect to see at farmers markets or at your downtown flagship location, Downtown Mesa, that is.
The 2 main categories are sourdough breads and sourdough croissant type items. The croissant was a very difficult thing to master. There's lots and lots of, especially home cottage bakers around the world that make sourdough loaves. But when you go into sourdough croissants, that's a very rare category of product. So that's definitely a unique thing to our bakery, unique, I think, in our whole state. So you can find a variety of these artisan loaves. You can find a variety of different variants of croissants, from open-faced danishes that have something like lemon curd on them to morning buns, which are cinnamon roll meets croissant. And of course, the base croissants. And our loaves are made with whole grain organic flour. We're actually about to embark on this really interesting iteration of our bread making where we're going to be milling a lot more of our own ancient grain flour at our local grocery store, Main Street Harvest, and using things like rye, spelt, these old school grains in our bread in these interesting techniques that bring even more flavor and durability to the loaf.
Are you sourcing any of these grains from local producers?
Yeah, so historically we have been one of Hayden Flour Mill's large customers. We also work with our regional mill, Central Milling, which is out of Utah, where the big bread basket of the United States is in the plains and Intermountain area. That's where a lot of the wheat is grown. We find that we can find the best versions of base bread flour from the Intermountain area, but there's some really nice grains grown here, like white Sonora, which we continue to source in berry form. So
I love the wheat on that you had etched into it. That kind of ties
beautiful.
into your. Looks like it ties into your logo.
yeah, so the scoring. We've always valued putting in that extra finishing touch into our loaves. You can actually go through our social media feeds and find all kinds of interesting designs from history that we've etched into loaves. We find that it's an interesting reflection of the work on the inside. You can't necessarily see the 30 hours of process that goes on the inside, but you can connect with something visually on the outside. And I believe that extra touch on the exterior is representative of the work that goes on the inside as well.
Yeah, it's just so appetizing as well. It's like a piece of art that you're excited to eat. It looks tremendous.
That's true.
So what's in store for you guys in the coming months, if it's anything other than what we've kind of dug into as far as, building out the team and producing a bunch of baked goods?
Yeah, I think it's mostly that. So we're trying to get to a point where we're a little more organized and future thinking now that we're kind of settling into a new home. So over the break, we took a break after Christmas and New Year's for our anniversary, and we sort of spelled out what's our main initiatives for this year. So this year we're really focusing on getting legs for the bakery, developing our team, getting a really solid foundation, really pouring into our core products. That would be our sourdough and sourdough croissants, and then a couple other like specialty breads that we make. And getting down to the science and educating our current team so that, we can build upon this for future generations.
Building artisan bakers. And I say that because at the level of production that we currently have, which we serve close to 3,000 customers a week, that level of production typically is assembly line work. You typically show up to a place and you're doing kind of the same thing over and over again, and you only get a little piece of the puzzle. That's what you'd find if you went to many other bakeries at our scale. But we're trying to build bakers, not assembly line workers. And so we take the extra steps to rotate people around to all the various elements of the bakery. And it can be difficult because that means that sometimes we pull somebody that's stronger off an area to teach them something new. But we believe that the future of our bakery is in actual bakers knowing what they're doing, having a passion for what they're doing, and understanding the why of why we make bread this way. So we must grow beyond just 3, 4, 5 people that love doing this into an entire team now.
Well, excuse me. Well, that was a wonderful story. Thank you guys so much for sharing.
Thank you.
I'm looking at this bread right now, and I'm wondering, do I want to take a photograph of it or just grab a few loaves and run? Because it looks like what I assume is going to be the best bread I've ever had in my life. So thank you guys so much again for sitting down with us. Marcy, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Taste of AZ podcast.
Yeah, and look for my article that's going to come out in the next issue on Proof.
Yep. Next issue, the summer issue of A Taste of AZ magazine, will have a feature on these wonderful folks that we've just been talking to for the past hour here. So keep an eye out for that, for photos and more information that you might not have picked up here. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.